Welcome everyone to this afternoon session of the Levelling Up Housing and Community Select Committee. This afternoon we're going to be looking at funding for Levelling Up, which is a flagship priority policy for the government to see how it's working in practice. Today we're going to have three panels. The first has three elected mayors who will introduce themselves in a minute. Then we go on to a panel with the Welsh Government and then one with the Northern Ireland Executive. At the beginning, I'll just ask members of the committee to put on record any interest they may have that may be relevant to the inquiry. I'm a Vice President of the Local Government Association. Moving round.
I'm a member of Bedford Town Deal Board.
Ian?
I employ a councillor in my office.
Okay.
I also employ a councillor in my office.
Bob?
I'm Vice President of the Local Government Association and I employ councillors in my office.
I employ a councillor in my office and I'm a member of the Shield Townsend Board.
Natalie?
I'm a Vice President of the Local Government Association.
And I am a Director of Eastleigh BID, which is focusing on levelling up in Eastleigh.
Andrew?
I'm Vice President of the LGA and I'm a board member of Northampton Forward.
Right. Thank you very much for that. And coming over to our witnesses now, we have, first of all, one of our mayors, Tracy, present with us. Would like to introduce yourself, Tracy.
Hello, it's great to be here. Tracy Brabin, Mayor of West Yorkshire.
Right, and then we have two mayors online. Andy Street, first of all.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Andy Street, Mayor of the West Midlands.
And Andy Burnham.
Hi everybody, Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester since 2017.
Right, and we'll come over to questions in a minute, but just before we do that, I think Andy Street, you'd like to say a few words about the tragedy in Solihull to us at the beginning.
Yes, well, Mr. Chair, you kindly invited me to do so, it's obviously literally a tragedy. There is no other word for it. Genuine accident, which is a horrible reminder of risk with ice. But if there can be a good thing in this situation, it's that the emergency services across fire, police and ambulance across the West Midlands have conducted themselves with great heroism over the last 24 hours. So, of course, our thoughts are with the bereaved families and indeed the community today who are in some shock.
Yes, thank you for that, Andy. And I think the whole of the committee would want to put on record our concern at this awful loss, and our thoughts are with the family. What must be the most awful time for them, we really feel for their loss on this tragic occasion. Okay, can we move on now to the issue of the inquiry we're conducting? Right, so I'll begin with Tracy in the room, then I'll come to our two mayors online. So first of all, Tracy, we had a white paper, well publicised, well spoken about by ministers who introduced it on levelling up. Did the white paper and the subsequent proposals in the bill go further enough to support devolution as you would like to see it in your area?
Well, thank you, Chair, for asking me to speak first. But if I may just also send condolences from the people of West Yorkshire over to Andy's constituents. It must have been absolutely horrendous. So the Levelling Up white paper, it was very welcome. It's absolutely necessary if we are going to improve productivity and our economy nationally, that we level up across the whole of the country. It was a well-written document. It was good bedside reading, and the problem is it needs to be attached to finance and to money. We collectively across the mayors were very positive that Michael Gove is back in post. He is a man that you can do business with and wants to get things done. But we have all said, and I really do strongly believe, that it can't just be a one-man operation. It has to be across the whole of government. It has to be across education and transport. You can't level up, for example, if you can't connect people to jobs and college and opportunities. So there is a job of work to be done. With what we've got so far, there are challenges. So the Brownfield Fund, whilst welcome, is challenging because of our land values. We're powering through, we're doing our best. However, for example, in Bradford, where land values are low, it's hard to make that sort of economic argument. So we've gone back to housing and said, is there a possibility we can cluster sites so we can get that BCR, make it work? Unfortunately, that's not happened. So that is a real challenge for us. And whilst we were also very grateful for the extra 22 million, that was given to us a year in, and we have to deliver in a year less time frame than the Brownfield Fund housing. So we still have the same red tape, the same processes, and we do have a particular difficulty that is very much associated with the North, and that is the value of land. If I may be positive and say one good thing, one of many, is that adult education budget that has worked. And I was looking at figures just before I came to give evidence, and it does look really promising that we're managing, because we know our communities, to reach those furthest away from education, to really make a difference to those furthest away from jobs and skills and employment. And we can be agile as well. So when bus operators were telling me that the reason why the bus didn't come was because they didn't have enough drivers, we could put on driver training, and we can be agile with businesses, and also widening access, which is really important to levelling up. So where free training was for those on minimum wages, we could widen it to the real living wage. So opening that up to further opportunities so that we can get those good skills and that great skilled workforce for the businesses that want to flourish in West Yorkshire. So in conclusion, there's good and bad, but it is a step in the right direction, but Michael Gove needs the support of the whole of government.
Okay, and just to get a plug in, I think the driver training programmes that have been, I think, very welcome in West Yorkshire are actually being coordinated by a firm called Realise, who are actually based in my constituency. So
very good.
I went to visit them the other day, so I'll get that plug in at the beginning.
Can't miss a plug.
Right, okay. Andy Street, do you agree with that that view, that some things are working but others still need a bit more effort to make them work?
Yep, that's fair. So I'd probably say that your inquiry is very well timed, because the white paper was, I think the strong view of the mayors was incredibly well intentioned, but there's still some outcomes that we still need to see. So the white paper talked in the funding area, which really is the critical issue. Is this going to lead to sufficient cash for doing what we have to do? It talked about funding simplification, which is definitely right. And we've seen, after that, we've seen the Chancellor talking about a consolidating funding statement, or funding settlement, for mayoral combined authorities in future spending reviews. So there's very clear evidence that the drive is in the right direction. But what we still need to see is actually some devolution of taxation power. So it's retaining existing tax, that elusive point of fiscal devolution. So that's something that's very, very necessary, and I think under consideration by the Chancellor at the moment. On the what's gone well, what's not gone well, some departments have really embraced devolution, both with powers and cash. And I'd have to say we find the Department of Transport overall pretty good on that. And the recent settlement, the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, would be a good example. There are other areas where we've still got to win that type of confidence, and we might come to some of those later on.
Okay, Andy Burnham, right, and since the white paper, Andy, have things actually moved on? I mean, are we actually making progress practically?
Is that for me, Clive?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, I think they have. So the white paper promised what they called a trailblazer deal with the West Midlands and Greater Manchester. And Andy's team and my team are very much in productive conversations with the government at the moment. And I think there's a time frame of the end of January that we're loosely working to see if that can be signed off. So a new devolution deal early in the new year, I think would be a real boost for devolution in England. And obviously the government are looking at other devolution deals in other places as well. So what I would say, really, to agree with Andy and Tracy, the white paper was good. If we remember the criticism pre-Michael Gove's arrival, it was that levelling up had never been properly defined. Well, he did define it, and the white paper was something that we could all get behind. But it was words, and it's translating the words into deeds that is more difficult. And I think Andy was just touching on this, as was Tracy. The trailblazer and the nature of what we agree with the government at the end of January, I think, will determine, to what extent the government as a whole is wedded to devolution. So there's two areas I would pick out, Chair: skills and transport. Because actually, if we don't devolve more quickly over both of those areas, I think the regional economy will be at risk. It's clear that the economy in the north of England is very much at risk, but through inadequate transport at the moment. You can see that, you can feel it. It's not good enough, and therefore we need more control over that whole system, so that we can protect ourselves from some of the risks that we're facing. But similarly, skills. I think the call we all hear from our businesses is the kind of concern around the supply of talent, and we need to be able to ensure that we have that, if you like, that talent pipeline as strong as we can make it. And skills is an area where I think we have to see progress. Otherwise, the regional economy, I think, will be at risk going forward. So those would be the two acid tests, if you like, of the Trailblazer deal, as far as I'm concerned. And we're hopeful for a positive conclusion, but we still don't yet know quite what the government will put on the table.
Right. Let's move on. And one of the issues that's been raised with this is the whole issue of competitive bidding, as opposed to simple funding allocations. I think, Andrew Lewis, you want to explore that with the mayors.
Yes, Chairman, thanks very much. And as Clive says, we've touched on this quite a bit as a committee. I wonder if all three of you could tell us how much you've spent, both financially and in time terms, on competitive bidding processes over the years. And with those ones that you've been unsuccessful in, has there been good or not good feedback from the government departments in question? Tracy.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting when the Secretary of State comes to your committee in the new year to also ask the Secretary of State how much has been spent by government on assessing bids, because it's hard to quantify, because hours spent are spent on various things. Running programmes that are already up and running, whilst also preparing competitive bids. But there is a couple of strands to that. One is that devolution and the erosion of local authority budgets has meant that fewer staff are meant to do more bids. There are bids, for example, in the Levelling Up 3, which we'll come to, where our MCA is encouraged to bid in for transport, but because we've got CRSTS, it's unlikely we're going to get it, but we're spending time because we have to bid. The investment zones, we prepared suggestions, and then obviously government's minds were changed. There's a whole sequence of competitive bidding pots that are taking up far too much time, are inefficient, and, for example, having to bid for 2.5 million for the rural element of the UK SPF. 2.5 million pounds we're bidding, and that bid has got to be signed off by 3 government departments. This is just a waste of our time. Now, there is the opportunity, I think, from government on the back of the Trailblazers, giving funding settlements to MCAs to just get on with it. We know our communities, we know what needs to be delivered. We can be held to account, as we are doing today, in front of select committees, Public Accounts Committee, however you wish us to be held to account. But this is just not working. It is a waste of money and time. And also, those areas of deprivation, those local authorities whose budgets have been absolutely slashed, are behind others in the queue because they just don't have those resources. So it's just not working. And if I may also say, when we got City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement that we had to bid for, we were also then held to account by number 10 advisors coming for 200 miles from London to my office to tell me whether we could have a grass roof on a bus station and what colour the bins are. So we've got through the bidding process and still there are hands meddling. Fortunately, that person is no longer in post, but I still am, so we continue doing the good work to deliver for the people of West Yorkshire. But this bidding process, if there is one thing the committee could take away from this session, the bidding process is ineffective, inefficient, it's expensive, it doesn't deliver, and it is also subject to ministerial changes in the weather, which is not good for the North and it's not good for the UK.
When you've not been successful with a bid for one reason or another, have you felt that government departments have come back to you to explain why, or just said, no, sorry, you don't get that one?
Well, if I may just use an example, the Mayor of South Yorkshire is not here, but when Dan Jarvis was the Mayor, they put in for the bus improvement plan, the BSIP. We were really lucky, we got 70 million, they didn't get a penny. And I asked, what was the feedback? And very little feedback. People just move on. It's just not good enough. And the goalposts are changing all the time, as we saw with the investment zones. So we know our communities. We know how to deliver on the government's pledges and the government's commitment to levelling up. Give us the powers, the tools and the money to do it.
Thank you. And Andy Street, now same question. Can you tell us how much you've spent money and time on competitive bidding over the years that you've been in office? And when you have been unsuccessful, have you had any useful feedback from government departments?
So Andrew, I'll try to be brief because there's lots of questions. And Tracy's covered the efficiency piece, but I want to take your question really from a philosophical point of view, if you don't mind, because the point at stake here is what's the principle of devolution? Surely the principle is that there is a direct election in, I think, each of our cases amongst nearly 3 million people. We're put in place, we lay out our plans before, but then what happens, despite all of that, the decision making actually still rests in London. That is not devolution. It goes against the principle of better decisions are taken closer to the scene of the action. And so I think the real issue here is if you trust people with these roles and then you hold them to account with the electorate directly, then actually you need to entrust them to take the right decisions, not in a sense have their proposals marked by civil servants and ministers in London. And just, it might seem a cheeky thing to say, but I do feel this very strongly. It seems to me there has to be better value added from central government officials looking at issues that are of much greater significance for the country than, frankly, how relatively small sums of money are spent across each of our regions.
I mean, and I think that philosophical point is a very important part of what all this is about. So in terms of value added, I'm reading slightly between your lines there, Andy, that you haven't particularly had much added value in terms of feedback from government.
If I'm very honest, and I suspect you've got, and I don't mean this to be critical, I just mean to be descriptive, you might have the wrong witnesses for this point, because I think we all lead authorities that have actually got sophisticated executives. We've done very well from the competitive bidding process. I can add up the total value that we've brought in, but I was with members of the LGA last week and they were joking at me that the system suits you at the moment, Andy. That may be true. So I personally cannot complain about how we've done from it. And when we haven't had a good outcome, the feedback has been reasonable. But I actually think there's a much broader point than that.
Thank you. So Andy Burnham, same questions to you.
Well, I was going to say something similar to Andy, because it probably is local authorities that feel the frustration of this more than us. There is, as Tracy has said, an example of a combined authority losing out from a bidding process. But by and large, we would get a return from having submitted a bid. I don't have the figure that you were looking for, but what I do have is a figure from the University of Sheffield, who did some analysis across local government. And they found that 90% of bids for competitive funds were prepared by outside consultants. So I think the bill, without having the figure, is massive, and it's money that just goes straight out the door with not a huge amount of benefit for the residents of those areas, particularly where the bids are not successful. And for me, as somebody who was in national government, now working more within the world of local government, I think it implies a very poor mindset on the part of Whitehall, a sort of lack of awareness of what's been done to local government over the years, in that local government have lost funds, so their capability has been reduced. And all councils are finding it harder and harder to have the capability within to bring schemes forward. They're then being asked to use that reduced resource to bid when they're not guaranteed that it will be successful. And as I've just said, incurring huge financial costs as a result of that without providing a service necessarily or a result for residents. But then there's the opportunity cost, all the time that is spent on that. And what I'd like to do, Chair, at this point is just point to what is a potential solution. So in the autumn statement, the government very helpfully pointed to the idea of a single settlement that it is considering for Greater Manchester and the West Midlands Combined Authority as part of the Trailblazer deal. So in effect, a block grant similar to Scotland and Wales, where there is much greater flexibility to use that funding. But as Tracy said before, it absolutely should come with strong accountability. And I would be more than happy to attend any select committee of the House to account for delivery against the outcomes that we hopefully will jointly agree with the government. So I would say that is exciting if Whitehall is showing its willingness to change and move towards funding of that kind. It would mean we're all more focused on delivery rather than bidding, and that can only be a good thing. And we'd use public money better. I think at the moment, Whitehall is making Town Hall waste money. That's what bidding does. Whereas we need to be working towards a system where everyone doesn't have to plead for money. Everywhere should get funding more based on needs, I would say. And that, I think, is a big change that really should come through. And I hope this Select Committee inquiry, which, as Andy Street said, is very welcome, the timing of it. I hope we could all together on a cross-party basis move towards a system where national government trusts local government more and gives it the ability to deliver rather than tying it up in all of these endless competitive processes.
Well, if we do see that really will be extraordinary, I have to say. So we'll look forward to it. But would you say in that world where we if we do end up getting to a sort of single pot sort of grant, as it were, would there be any place for bidding type pots announcements from central government, or would it be better just to get away from all that altogether?
I guess at the margins for an exceptional decision. So obviously Channel 4 was an example, but I don't think any of us found that a particularly productive process. We'd rather a decision was made and it was just given because it just takes a lot of time. But you could look also at the headquarters of Great British Railways. Again, a sort of long drawn out process where a lot of money is spent on campaigns by various places, and it's not necessarily the best use of resources in these times. So I wouldn't say there's no role, is what I would say, but I think we need to get away from this idea of winners and losers in a bidding contest. And one of the points I wanted to make today, Chair, was to start thinking about levelling up as becoming a long-term permanent mission that is enshrined in the way the country works, as opposed to it being a bit ad hoc and one area wins and another one loses. I've been looking at the German constitution recently, and in the German constitution there is something called the basic law, and the basic law requires that there is an equivalent of living standards between the Länder, the regions of Germany. Now, can you imagine if we had such a provision in this country, how different life would be for people in the north of England? It would be very different indeed. And I think we've got to move levelling up now to a more kind of permanent, long-term mission that the country works towards, where local government and combined authorities as part of that are just trusted to deliver. And I just think the country would benefit from that long-term approach, where all areas get an amount of funding that they can work with over the long term to plan for the economic and social regeneration of their areas. And I just think the country would be in a better place if we had that.
Thank you. Andy Street, no role for bidding, continued role or just on the margins, as Andy Burnham just said?
I agree with what Andy said. It's just on the margins. But as you've given me the microphone back, can I just mention one other thing, which I think is a very important point in terms of what's expected of combined authorities for making the big step towards this single pot settlement, which is really the utopia that we've been talking about since Michael has funded his first paper. And people think we want to sort of rob the bank and run away. Not so. We're absolutely up for, as Andy B said, the accountability framework. And to give you a really good example of something that's worked very well for us, our housing deal that we struck in 2018 when Sajid Javid was Secretary of State, it had performance criteria in it, and we only got the second, third, fourth tranches if we delivered them. So the cash was already all there. The decisions on how we spent it are with us, but the outcomes had to be subject to scrutiny. And I do think that is a mature model that we are very willing to develop for other areas.
Thank you. Tracy?
I agree with both Andys that on the margins, 10% potentially, where you could see innovation, excitement, a bit of new thinking, R&D. I think, it can't be the way forward, though. We have to have that, as the two Andys have said, that funding pot. And if I may just very quickly say, I do welcome the report that came out a couple of days ago that government are looking at widening trailblazers, because we have been around for a while as a combined authority. Whilst I may be a new mayor, the combined authority has been proving it can spend on budget and to time for many years. So I am hoping that will be widened out to MCAs that do deliver.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Mary, you've got a supplementary, I think.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick one. The criticism from local authorities very often is around funding, that it's never enough for their needs. If we were to move towards a single pot settlement agreement, what would the criteria be for that single pot to be agreed? Andy Burnham?
Thank you, Mary. Well, to be agreed with the government. So I would imagine that we would have agreements across a range of outcomes that we would commit to deliver as part of that funding agreement, and then we would be held to account by. And as I said before, and Tracy said the same. We'd be happy to go before any select committee to account for that, but I think the outcomes would be more sophisticated than some of the silo-based outcomes that you get from Whitehall. You could have broader things that you're hoping to achieve for the area, or if it was the case that Whitehall wanted specifics, then I think we could be trusted to deliver. So one area that I'm interested, I mentioned before as part of the Trailblazer discussion, is skills. I think we need to move towards a very different skills system, and actually a system as opposed to a very fragmented landscape. I believe to make this work, we need to give all young people an offer at 16, and that should be A-levels, T-levels, or apprenticeship. We need to bring together the system, which we can do from our perspective. And if the government wanted, as part of that, to give me a target for increasing the number of T-levels, which have got a very high level of support in Greater Manchester, that would be absolutely fine, Mary, absolutely fine. And this is where devolution, I think, adds value to UK PLC, because we can then really drive the things from this level, which we all agree as a country are the things that we need to do. And also, if you look at in the context of public transport, it could be to increase patronage on public transport and set a very clear target for that. So I'm up for the discussion about it, if I'm honest, and I don't fear any of that accountability at all. And in fact, I think we'd all find it quite helpful, to be honest, to have a very clear set of things that everyone could judge us against, rather than sometimes, in our roles, some people say you've done nothing, or other people say, it'd be better to be said, here's what you said you would do, and then judge us against it. Because I'm confident now that there's a maturity in all of these systems, Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire and the West Midlands, that means we don't fear that at all. We're ready to get on and do it.
Okay, right. We'll move on then to look at the Shared Prosperity Fund. Kate Holland.
Thank you, Chair. Because there is limited flexibility with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, do authorities run the risk of a cliff edge? If I can put that to Andy Street first.
You may, and thank you for your question, because we've actually been in correspondence with the Minister on this very point only the last few weeks. So obviously it is good news that all the authorities represented, and indeed across the whole country, have had agreement to our proposal, so the cash will be coming soon. But there is a real issue, for example, that we can't move cash between different years, and we've only got a very few months of this year left. But perhaps more significantly to your question, we can't spend money on the skills and communities element of it until the third year. So to be really precise, and it's quite a detailed point, but I do think it's a practical point. We are seeking further flexibilities in the fund, just as you described.
Okay, Tracy?
Yes, I agree with what Andy said, but I would also just reiterate the issue for us is that we are losing a third in comparison to what government have promised when government said that no community would lose money in comparison to EU fundings. UK SPF for West Yorkshire, we've lost over a third, which means our cliff edge is deep and dangerous. We are certainly going to lose organisations that work in communities, that work with migrants, particularly important given the Ukrainian situation not getting any better. It is really important for us. The public feel they've had their pocket picked. I'm going to be really frank. They don't feel that government have been honest, and this cliff edge is really damaging. Now, we have tried with Gainshare and other powers to team and ladle to try and support particularly the employment hub employees. We don't want people to lose their jobs in a cost of living crisis. We're doing all we can, but we are definitely looking at 18 out of 33 live projects potentially going to the wall.
Andy Burnham?
Well, thanks, Kate. I think the principle here should be that Shared Prosperity Fund should not be any way worse than what it's replacing, but I'm afraid it probably is in a number of respects, and Tracy and Andy have touched on a couple. So shall I introduce a new element as well to complete the picture? The fund that it replaced, one of, is the European Structural Investment Fund, ESIF, and that was a seven-year funding programme. And obviously, Shared Prosperity Fund does not give that level of timeline. And if I could give you a relevant example from Greater Manchester as to why the 7-year horizon was helpful, if you look at something like innovation and really building an innovation economy, you need that level of that time span if you're to bring projects forward. So in the case of ESIF, it was very important in bringing through the National Graphene Institute in Manchester and the Graphene Engineering and Innovation Centre, which is really coming into its own. But it was done because of that longer term time frame. And I would say that the Shared Prosperity Fund needs to develop a similar long term approach with the amount of funding, as Tracy said, at least at European levels, and without this impact on the people and skills element, as Andy Street was saying. So I guess it's good that we're getting to the point now where allocations are being approved, but there are still some structural deficiencies in Shared Prosperity Fund compared to what it's replacing.
Thanks, Andy. If I can just come back to Andy Street again. Tracy was saying she's going to lose a third. What sort of impact are you expecting?
The numbers are the same across most of the country, actually. Now, the argument from the government is that in time it will come back to equivalence with the collective European. But certainly in the initial period, the transition, the numbers are fairly similar. And just like Tracy described, we have been trying to use other funding that we've got to make good some of those gaps as well. So I don't disagree with what Tracy said about the numbers.
Does that put at risk some of the partnership working with organisations within your area?
Not at all. It's the converse, actually. It's actually that whether it be the LEP integration into the CA, whether it be some of the fundings that local authorities allocate out. I think that what's happening is we're all trying to work in a really collaborative way, and actually the cooperation locally on how we use this cash has been good, and we've got cross-party unanimity on how we're trying to do that.
Tracy, have you anything further to add on that?
If I could just add that there is one strand of the UK SPF which is given from the centre, which is multiply, which seemed to be something that was in answer to a line in a budget somewhere from maybe the Chancellor, who's now the Prime Minister. And it is a lump of money, £12.5 million, very welcome, thank you for that. But it is completely controlled from the centre. Now, it's to teach numeracy to those furthest away from education. That is not an easy task. People are not going to walk into a classroom to learn numeracy. You have to surround those students with a different sort of offer. We know what type of support they need and we can give. Now, we're doing our bit and we're trying, but this does feel like just another example of devolution actually being controlled from the centre. And if you want numeracy numbers to improve, and we all do, give us that money and we can deal with it and handle it locally, and we can get those great outcomes for you.
Also, when you're dealing with numeracy or literacy, there's a level of confidence building beforehand.
Indeed.
Each of you have commented on expecting to lose a third. What will you have to cut to compensate for losing that third?
Yes, well, certainly, as I was mentioning, it looks like 18 of the 33 live projects are at risk. We are doing everything we can. There's Stronger Families project, as I said, the Migrant Project, community grants, but we're doing everything we can to mitigate that. But there is an economic difference to what was promised to what has been allocated to West Yorkshire. So from the 120 million we were expecting, it's 83 million. And I'm sure you will have an opportunity to speak to the Secretary of State about this as well when he comes before you next year.
Okay. Similar to Andy Burnham, what are you going to have to cut and to cover for this shortfall?
It's kind of a reduction, I guess, Kate, in the level of activity. We will, I think, we do have some concerns around the people and skills element and a reduction in availability of support. Also, potentially scaling back some of our infrastructure ambitions. It's a challenge, but obviously we're looking at how we can use some of the benefits within the funding, and one of the benefits could be that the lack of a requirement for match funding, which did exist before, does allow it potentially to be used more flexibly. So it's not all bad, Kate. There is some benefit here, but I think at this time, what we should be seeing is obviously more investment in skills and infrastructure, and we are planning on a reduced sort of time horizon, basically as a result of some of the changes that have come through. And then you add in the shorter term nature of the fund, it kind of works against that longer term planning.
Okay, Andy Street.
So I think we just need to be precise about what this word cut means. So let me just explain what's actually happening, because whilst I agreed with Tracy earlier on that it's about equivalence of money, what is actually happening is schemes that had a finite end date that were European funded, and they always knew they had a finite end date, are running to that end date. They are not being cut prematurely. They carry on.
Yes, that's true.
What is not likely to happen is that there won't be necessarily be an equivalent replacement for them. That is what the question is. No cut to an existing project. And this is tough love, but it is true that if you take on a contract, even in the old LEP days when the LEPs were responsible for this, there was no guarantee of that project having a new funding round. All the European funds had a finite time window. Now, it is true that there isn't the same amount of money, particularly in the skills area, to commission new projects. So that's the risk. And what we are trying to do is look at other budgets, for example, other skills funding, to be able still to commission them. That's the practical issue, but the projects are running to their agreed end date. In our case, actually, we're not finding a difficulty over infrastructure because other funding has come in to more than make up for the infrastructure element. So the real question is, where is the funding for the skills projects coming from?
Thank you.
Okay, can we move on now to the Levelling Up Fund? Paul.
Thank you, Chair. When Michael Gove recently appeared to our committee and gave evidence, he noted that he had an intention to have a third round of the Levelling Up Fund. Firstly, do you think there should be one? And secondly, what should it focus on? Give us your Christmas card wish list or Christmas wish list. First, Tracy, please.
Well, thank you. Well, currently we're still waiting for the outcomes of Levelling Up 2 round. Obviously, more money for our region is incredibly welcome, but we are facing a cost of living crisis, and it does feel slightly eccentric that local authorities are having to bid into Levelling Up funds in order to deliver what they used to deliver. So, for example, in Halifax, they were successful in Levelling Up fund bid for a new leisure centre, which now they're having to pause because costs escalated to such a point that they couldn't deliver on government timetables, which are always incredibly stretching. And I will say the department have been really good working with Halifax and Calderdale Council to try and find a solution. But this can't be the way forward, that we're just bidding in for EV charging points, for leisure centres, for toilets, where what should be done is to Andy Burnham's point that local government, the cuts to local government have been so deep over decades that there is no fat left. So they're having to bid in against each other for money that should be already in their budgets. Kirklees, for example, has lost 60% of its funding since 2010. So, of course, their focus is on adult social services and children's services. They're having to bid for the stuff that they would normally offer. So my Christmas wish list would be, well, certainly to index link gain share, because at the moment that's not index linked. So as every year goes by, and of course with rampant inflation, it's worth less and less. But my top of my Santa list is, please do give us those allocations of funding, hold us to account on the outcomes. In West Yorkshire, we already have 3 scrutiny committees, which is quite unique for MCAs across the country. We're held to account continually, and we'll continue to do so, but we have to get out of these funding pot bids.
Thank you. Andy Burnham, third round, yes, no, and what would you use it for? What should it focus on?
Well, if I could play back to you the main frustration that I hear, and I'm sure Tracy and Andy hear from local authorities, is sometimes the lack of alignment between the Levelling Up Fund and other funds, such as the Towns Fund and the High Street Fund. And all of this gets very confusing. I would say at least consolidate all of those things. But I would go further, and I would do exactly what Tracy just proposed, which is put this funding back within core local authority funding. Because here, people are bidding for things they used to be able to do. I mean, an example Tracy gave, there is a Changing Places toilet programme. I mean, why is there a national bidding fund for that? You know, surely local authorities should have the money within their capital budgets to make those kind of changes to their local areas. And I think we did see a trend. I don't know why exactly it was all done like this. Perhaps it was, you know, the kind of awarding of a bid allows a press release to be issued, and an MP to have said that they got this money out of the government. It felt that some of that was behind this bidding culture, and I do think, rather than just accept it as part of the landscape that we're in, I think we need to start to challenge it and say local government just needs to be trusted, get on with the job a bit more, rather than pleading all the time for scraps off the table, and actually for the money that it used to have anyway to build leisure centres or public toilets. I really do think we would see quicker and better delivery. And in my experience, again, from my time in Whitehall so the 5 or so years I've done this job, I am actually clear that Whitehall has no real right to do this to local government, because by making everybody bid, it implies a lack of trust, and they're constantly making people prove themselves. Whereas in my experience, I think national government under all colours, by the way, wastes more money than local government. I think local government is very, very lean, actually, and uses things, because it's closer to where things will happen, it makes better decisions often about a local project. And I do think, while we can improve the Levelling Up Fund and integrating it with the Towns Fund and the High Streets Fund, for instance, I don't think we should accept that this should be a permanent part of the landscape. I think we've got to get back to a point where local government in England has more capability to do more for itself, deliver more quickly, rather than always having to jump through Whitehall hoops.
Thank you very much. And Andy Street, please.
So I think, in a sense, you've just heard it from the other two. This is almost the textbook example of the principle that we were talking about in the first round of questions. So this is, there's been some welcome investments here. Nobody's going to sniff at that. But you come to, is it the right way of doing things? And I would say categorically not. What we need to get to is the trust that a settlement for a region or a local authority would bring about. And just let me try to explain one other feature that we didn't pull out earlier as to why. Levelling Up Fund bids are incredibly random, from colleges in Wolverhampton to swimming pools in Birmingham to high streets. It's all sorts of things. And of course, the local authorities have really reasons why they bid for that. But is there a real strategic plan behind these, either locally or centrally? There is not. And surely what we should be looking for is a strategy around how a revival of a city or a region can come about, which brings together the different elements and has got one plan. Different funding streams lead into that plan. And my strong argument would be the local authorities working with its combined can do that if it has sufficient funding to enable it to do this. This random approach won't get the best bang for the buck.
Thank you very much. I know I'm conscious of time. I just want to ask a very quick question to the three of you. Tracy mentioned the example in Halifax with costs going up. If you've been successful in bidding on any of the previous rounds, can you give any examples in your area where there's been pressure or risk due to the inflationary pressures that we currently have? So if I could, you mentioned Halifax, Tracy, can I ask you?
Yeah, I mean, Halifax is a perfect example, £4 million of escalation, but the timetables stay the same. A timetable of delivery. It just can't be done. And I know that there is some flexing, but we have to, if we sold on this bidding process, we have to work as partners rather than the man in Whitehall knows best and we have to hit that deadline or the project doesn't get the money and can be withdrawn almost overnight. So I think that is a good example that hopefully will be resolved.
Thank you. Andy Burnham, any inflationary pressures on your bids?
Well, I actually had the leisure centre in Calderdale as my example as well in my briefing, so I don't think I've got an example.
Don't steal my leisure centre, Andy Burnham.
We're not trying to annex West Yorkshire just yet, Tracy. Maybe one day.
That's phase 4.
What I can give you is the figure that I think came from an IPPR report, which said that as a result of inflation, the Levelling Up Fund is effectively reduced by 340 million by 25-26. So I think what you're going to find is a kind of, maybe not as devastating as putting a whole leisure centre on hold, but I think lots of projects will be a bit up in the air, let's say, because they're going to have to find a bit of extra local resource to meet that gap, and possibly a slightly longer time frame. But I can't, I'm sorry, give you a direct, tangible example from Greater Manchester.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you. And Andy Street, please.
As far as I know, none of our projects have been put on hold, but the process that Andy's just explained is what's happening. Every single project, whether it be Levelling Up Fund, CRS, TS, you name it, we've got inflationary pressures in each one of them, and the local authorities or the CA, we've got a paper on it on Friday actually, I know Tracy's already taken one, are all having to look at additional resources to supplement every grant that we've had.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Let's move on to metrics and data and how need is assessed. Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Andy Street, if I come to you first, because I believe that you're leaving in a few minutes. There has been a great deal
Thank you
of...
for reminding everybody. I'm sorry.
There has been a great deal of discussion around the use of metrics about what data should be used and how need can be judged. Evidence so far has noted that need, according to some, is not being measured fairly and effectively, and especially Barnsley Borough Council questioned the current use of data. So can you tell us what metrics should be used to determine need and why?
So it's a very precise question around the metrics for the Levelling Up Fund. And I think what I've already said to you rather sort of implies I don't think that's the right way of going about it at all. I think it should be something much more strategic about the overall approach. I've looked in preparation for this question at the way in which the data was taken for the Levelling Up Fund, and I actually find it hard to criticise in principle. I'm sure others may disagree with it, but it was tried to be done around a basket of measures that seemed particularly reasonable to me. So if you don't mind, I'd like to make just one other point about the way the data has worked. And this, what appeared to us to be very harsh judgment of some urban areas that were judged in category 2 or 3. Coventry was originally 2, Solihull was originally 3. Both have within them communities that are amongst the most deprived in the country, and we felt that it was very harsh the way they were effectively excluded for funding. But the basket idea, I didn't find that too difficult to come to terms with.
Thank you. Andy Burnham, same question to you, sir.
Well, I would just want to say that we very strongly welcome the recommendation in the Levelling Up White Paper to improve the provision of subnational data to combined authorities and local authorities. And I think there was a suggestion of creating a statistical service subnational data strategy, but we're still waiting on that. I think there was an idea of a spatial data unit. So all of those proposals were very welcome, but we're not aware of any progress on them. And so if the committee could push on that, I think it would be beneficial for everybody, because obviously there is data held in Whitehall departments that we need to know about, and yet we don't at the moment. So it was an important commitment in the white paper, but as of yet, we don't think there has been any tangible progress on it.
Thanks. Tracy?
Yeah, no, I would agree with Andy Street that the basket idea is sensible. We have our own intelligence team in the MCA, and we have a State of the Region report. It uses a basket of 40 different headline indicators. But I do think there is a lack of clarity about the purity of decision making around who gets what when, and I think whether that's looking at it again around indices of multiple deprivation, is that one that should be used in more widely or taken into account more deeply. I think when it comes to data, we all have to be data-driven and evidence-led, and it can't necessarily... Politics often gets in the way, doesn't it? But I think data gives us the truth of the situation, and I think we should be responding to deprivation and to opportunities to deliver on government's expected outcomes, and we are on the ground and we can help government do that.
And if the correct metrics are not used for future levelling up funds, what impact will this have on communities across the UK?
Well, it erodes trust in politicians, It erodes trust in society. People don't feel heard or valued. And this is why devolution is so powerful, that local leaders can speak as the voice of the public that they represent. And I really do believe that when it looks like there's some sort of behind-the-scenes decision-making that isn't clear, people lose faith in politicians and anger builds, and that's when you have problems with lack of democracy. People feel disengaged from politics. I think it's an opportunity, if you get it right, to show that you're listening to the public and you're responding to need.
Andy Street, do you agree with Tracy?
Yes, I think I've already said that, frankly.
Okay, thanks.
Nothing to add, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Not necessarily on everything before you get ready.
No.
We do agree on a lot, though.
No, but we're all in the M10 together. We all share the particular problems. We're all feeling the pain.
Right.
Yeah.
Andy Burnham, would you like to add anything?
Just a quick point, picking up on the trust and fairness point. As I understand it, the difference in per capita funding between the best funded local authorities in the country and the lowest is getting on for £200, so £909 per head in the best funded, 691 of available funding per capita in the lowest funded. That's quite a gap. And I think it gets worse the more that council tax is expected to bear the strain of local funding, because obviously some of the poorer areas have less ability to raise funding through council tax. It's quite a gap, and I think it's getting to a point where that's becoming way too big from my point of view.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Right. I want to move on now to the issue of funding inequalities. And I'd say, Andy Street, do you have to leave us now, or can you stay a little bit longer?
I should leave you. If you don't mind, Clive. I did say 5 o'clock, so I think rather than breaking the rhythm of the next question, I should probably.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming. You did give us a band.
But I'm going to take my leave. Thank you for your inquiry.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Bye bye.
Right, and move on to the issue that's just been raised, actually, funding and inequalities. Natalie.
Thank you, Chair. And I do want to actually build on that, those remarks that you just made, Andy, in relation to the extent to which council tax is now bearing a transfer, effectively a financial transfer from national to local. Within that context, and both of you have touched on this a bit, but I just wanted to explore it a bit further. To what extent do you think that the funding for levelling up is intended to meet some of that shortfall in funding for local government, or is it additional? And I know we've mentioned sort of the toilets and the leisure centres, but obviously in relation to transport, that might be a slightly different, that might be different in your minds in terms of whether that's additional or replacement. Who wants to go first? Andy?
Well, I think it's a good way of thinking about it, isn't it? That there are basics that all councils should be funded to provide, and they shouldn't be discretionary. I don't think funding for leisure, culture, toilet, those kind of things, that there should just be enough in the budget for all areas to provide. And I go back to that point I made near the start, Natalie, the point about equivalence of living standards in the German constitution. I think we need to get our own version of that. What is the kind of British version of the German constitution where we can guarantee an equivalence of basic infrastructure and standards in all parts of the country, and not have what can be quite a massive difference actually from one part of the country to another. When it then comes to sort of things that are additional to that basic infrastructure, then I think that would be a more appropriate use of levelling up funding and bidding, if that makes sense. I think we've got a very, very confused picture when it comes to local funding in this country, and it's not producing a sort of a fairness across all of the different regions. And I think we can't really go much further without unpacking this, because the frustration for me is we've not really seen as many visible signs of levelling up as we would have liked, but I very much support the agenda, but I would like to have seen more progress. However, I think by putting levelling up front and centre, as the government did, I think it has unlocked a cry for regional fairness that isn't going to go away, and if anything is only going to get louder and louder. And I think the message you're getting from all three of us this afternoon is you are more likely to achieve a levelling of living standards across the country where funding is not discretionary or competitive, but where it's baked in to what local areas have got, and it's there for the long term. That is how I would say we would start to erode some of the inequalities in health or in other areas, if you want to look at it that way. So, I think levelling up was the right theme at the right time, and I give the government credit for that. But I think it has to become a kind of long-term national mission, and we have to move it from this space where it's been, which is a bit discretionary and a bit hit and miss and ad hoc, to something that is much more, hardwired into the way the country works.
Tracy.
Yes, I would agree with what Andy said. And I think, just to build on his point, what is actually levelling up? And isn't it about giving everybody across the UK the same basic offer of access to a library, access to decent transport, access to a leisure centre where you can, exercise or take your kids. We all should have that expectation that wherever we live, those basic needs are going to be fulfilled. And we have seen, and particularly I would say across the north, the cost of living crisis, inflation, what used to be that safety net is now absolutely a thread. It used to be local authorities would provide services that if you were out of work, you could go to the leisure centre and have a swim, and the local authority would support you, or you would go to the library or have a course. Now it's bed banks, it's energy banks, it's food banks, it's people living day to day. We have a job as locally elected leaders to reset that balance, and working with government, we are up for this, but it is in the landscape, and I do have some numbers where Leeds is looking at has lost 263 million each year from 2011 to 2023. Calderdale having to find 120 million of savings. They found savings of 120 million. Bradford, budget reduction of 310 million. It's just been eroded year on year. And now these pots are supposed to fill that in. So we've got the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, and a large chunk of that is potholes. It's funding to fill potholes. This is something that local authorities used to do as part of their bread and butter. And now we're bidding to provide that infrastructure. It's about dignity, and I think when we talk about levelling up, it's about fairness and dignity.
So just sort of building from that, because my area is obviously covered by Kent County Council that put in concerns about potentially facing bankruptcy, and my area is also an area in Dover and Deal that has very significant areas of deprivation that hasn't benefited from some of the funds that you have described in the same way. So I'm just very keen to understand. I mean, all three of you as mayors have set out how successful you've been in bidding and how effective your particular authorities are in being able to bid. Andy, you've been mayor since 2017. Obviously, Tracy, you're a newer mayor. But over the period that we've had the mayoral combined system, we've actually seen those inequalities, according to the IPPR, get worse, particularly around health and sickness in the North East. And I wondered to what extent you think that the ambitions that you have set out as mayor are achievable within the context of the levelling up vision that you described for your single pot and alternative funding.
Well, you're looking at me. So I think, of course, it is possible, but we have to have that arm that's tied behind our back untied. We have to be able to deliver. We don't wasting time coming back to Whitehall for with a begging bowl. We could get on and help deliver. Now, I know devolution is a way to try and resolve some of the problems of inequality, but it can't be that you erode the finances of local authority and then you expect mayors to patch it up. It's got to be a 360 approach from government. And I do think their commitment to levelling up is an opportunity to be incredibly bold and to have a new contract with the public and say, we believe in devolution and we are going to make sure that wherever you live, you get those same life chances as somebody who lives in the south. Transport.
Not all of the south.
No, of course not. But areas where people have had, for example, on transport, 3 times as much is spent per head in the south and in London to the north, and that's been happening for decades. So we have such a long way to go in order to get that equalisation that you obviously so need for your area.
Yeah, not all parts of the south need more transport. We need more transport investment. Andy. So you have been a mayor a long time. So what is it that you need to drive this equality agenda?
It's that long-term approach that I was talking about before, Natalie. And the single settlement, the block grant, really would help us, I think. The reason being, the potential of devolution is to join the dots on the ground between the Whitehall silos. So we can make things make sense here because we can bring it all together into a coherent whole. And if you look at health devolution in Greater Manchester, because obviously we had that 5 years ago, what we have shown is actually we can move the dial. So there's a study in the Lancet recently of the first 5 years of health devolution in Greater Manchester. It concluded that life expectancy had increased here faster than expected, and it had increased most in our most deprived communities. And what it said was the reason why that had happened was the high degree of alignment, both between public bodies, but also between our public bodies and the community and voluntary sector. What we're doing here is adopting a mission-based approach to things. For instance, on rough sleeping, where we've really massively reduced the level of rough sleeping over the last 5 years, with plenty of support from government, which we're grateful for. I guess it's that ability here to join the dots around people and places and make it all make sense. And I would say you get a much more efficient use of government funding in that scenario rather than the old way of working. So we have definitely moved faster on things. I mean, I funded things here though outside of the Whitehall system completely, such as a free bus pass for our 16 to 18-year-olds, which I would say is hugely raising aspiration across Greater Manchester, because I mentioned before about all young people having a pathway at 16, A-level, T-level apprenticeship. That free bus pass really is their means to getting to those opportunities at the end of school. So I think this is working. Devolution in England is a success story. But it's in its very earliest days, and it could be so much more. If you look at Leeds, Birmingham, Manchester, there is an energy and a confidence in these cities that we've not seen in a long time. If you look at the skyline of city centre Manchester, it tells a real story about confidence, about a place that's going somewhere, going upwards actually. There is so much potential in these places. And the more you back them, the more they will deliver back to UK PLC. I'm absolutely sure about that, Natalie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. Moving on to important issues that have already been mentioned, of infrastructure and transport. Ian Byrne.
Thanks, and I'll just stay with Andy because he forgot to mention Liverpool there and then major cities. I'm sure Steve Rodden will be on the phone in the next 5 minutes.
Or Sheffield.
He's just texted me and he's just cut him off. He's cut him out of his will.
He's still smarting from losing a DJ battle a couple of weeks ago. No.
So we're on the thorny subject of transport, Andy. So part of ensuring the success of levelling up is arguably dependent on maintaining and improving infrastructure across the country. The white paper states that better transport will attract people, business, finance, culture. Also, physical infrastructure are vital to improving productivity. So transport networks will also be core drivers of this mission. So in your experience, does this ring true? And how do we achieve a transport network the North deserves, and not the shambles we have now? And we won't mention the trains.
Yeah. Well, Ian, I'm going to answer that in two parts, if you like. One positive, one less so. The positive is that the white paper correctly set a goal of London-style public transport for all parts of England by 2030. And the reason why I say correctly, because we've been calling for that, and I know Steve in Liverpool has called for the same. And I think we're perhaps a little bit ahead of Liverpool and Leeds on this, but we're all working together on it. We're all working to that goal. So obviously I've taken the decision to put buses back under public control. The reason that's so important is because you can then start to integrate bus, tram, hire bike, and introduce that daily cap over all transport. So that London-style vision is actually just a couple of years away now. We will have integrated the buses with the trams by the start of 2025. All of it will be back under public control by that point. And then I think you've got a very different offer for the travelling public. And the aim as part of the Trailblazer is to then get more control over overland rail, as TfL did in London, where we then have commuter rail services inside that daily cap, if you like, Ian, where there's like a TFGM rail service that that people then can use to get around. And all of that will make public transport much more competitive when it comes to the cost of travelling around by car. And I think we'll finally break the domination of the car in large parts of the Northwest. So this is a difficult journey that we're on at this particular moment in time, but Greater Manchester is right in it. And my message to the government is please work with us as a partner on this. And they are largely, we've had a very positive response. You know, we need that support as we go through this, because if we successfully do this in Greater Manchester, we will help create the template that others will then use. Yourselves in Liverpool, Tracy in Leeds. You know, there's no. We're all wanting the same thing, and we all want to help each other get to the same place. I guess then the slightly less positive point is to talk about rail and the state of railways at the moment, because in many ways they're dragging us down. If you look at city centre Manchester at the moment, look at our 5 train stations: Piccadilly, Oxford Road, Deansgate, Salford Central, Manchester Victoria. They've barely seen any investment for the last 20 or so years. The infrastructure between them is absolutely at saturation point. It's creaking Victorian infrastructure. The services, well, we all know, don't we? They've just gone completely backwards. You know, we're coming up a decade since George Osborne's Northern Powerhouse speech kicked all of this off, and he said that rail had to be the heart of a vision for the Northern Powerhouse. In that decade, rail services have gone backwards, and it's really, really hurting us at the moment. So it's because of, as Tracy was saying, the fragility of the Northern railway system that means, you know, we're suffering more than other parts of the country. So there is a template for how you can build a better future, but it's frustrating when at that same time parts of our transport system are going backwards. I think, Ian, the motto of the story from Merseyrail, where you have a railway under more local control, and I hope you agree with this, is devolve local control of transport systems delivers better systems. Absolutely. Because it brings an accountability that isn't there in the national railway system, and it allows an integration of that transport with other modes of transport. And for me, this is absolutely the way to go. But the government needs to back it, as Tracy said. You know, we can't do it without subsidy. London didn't build its transport system without subsidy over the years. Well, the north of England won't be able to do it without subsidy as well. So we do need the government to come in as a partner.
Thanks, Andy. Tracy, would like to build on that because you've been brilliantly vocal on this, and I'd just like to congratulate you. That last answer was fantastic. Everything you said there about investments, and you know, it was absolutely spot on. So well done.
Thank you. But Andy and I and the mayors are all in agreement that you can't level up without having access to jobs and opportunities, and that's all about transport. Now, I think government get that we need a better transport network, but it doesn't feel like there's one particular guiding mind delivering on, particularly around buses. We've staggered from one cliff edge to another with a bus recovery grant. We were grateful that government extended it, but we are back again in April, where there's going to be a cliff edge. And whilst I've been able to introduce mayor's fares, which is the £2 cap, and the 450 day saver, which is increasing patronage, I can't stop bus companies from cutting routes. So people can say, oh, you know, great fare, but there's no bus for me to get on. Yeah. So we are investigating. We've started the process in the first week of me becoming mayor. We kicked off the process to look at public control, and the decision for that will be 2024. It's a long process, it's government timetables, but it's really important for us to have that integrated London-style transport network. And if I may just say, I'd like to thank the Transport Minister for the Secretary of State for Transport meeting us, the Northern Mayors, to talk about the situation. But actually, since the timetable changes on Sunday, it's got even worse. How is that possible to be even worse from TP and Avanti? I don't know. But we will be continuing to be the voice of the travelling public, because you cannot level up anywhere without a transport network to get people to jobs, opportunities and colleges, and to hear stories of people missing funerals, not going for that job interview because they can't get there, students saying, I want to go to this university but I'll have to cross the Pennines, so I'm going to go somewhere else, somewhere I didn't want to go. These decisions are people's futures, and every single person that can't get that train is impacted. So we are going to continue that campaign.
Can I just add very quickly, Ian?
Go ahead, Dan.
Just very quickly, just to back up what Tracy's saying. Obviously, today's the first day of the new timetable, and so a lot is riding on this. We were promised, Tracy and I, at Transport for the North, that this would be the route to get more stability into the system. The figures I have from midday today were TransPennine Express, 44% of trains on time. And they cancelled or they removed last night, I think close to 100 trains. And even then they're only at 44%. Avanti, West Coast, at midday today, 12% on time. Now they may be running more services today out of Manchester to London, which is welcome, but 12% on time? I mean, these figures are just unbelievably bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just touch on the desire to improve health, Tracy. So how important is it that transport in places outside London receive the funding it needs so we can decarbonise transport, to reach net zero, but also general desire to improve health, as Andy touched on before, taking cars off the road. The air pollution, certainly my constituency, is appalling at times. So it's a key driver of what we need to do.
Thank you. Well, the Levelling Up bill, I think, could do with a greater focus on the climate emergency, because we're not going to level up our communities if, for example, in Hebden Bridge, when communities and homes are being washed away, you can't level up when 1 in 20 in West Yorkshire they die from air pollution, something related to air pollution. We've got to act swiftly and at pace, and that's why a transport system that's the London-style system to get people out of their cars and onto buses and trains is so important. To get freight off the road and onto the rail network is so important. Now, in West Yorkshire, we are, whilst governments say 96 billion is being spent on upgrades, 50 billion of that is not is coming to Birmingham. So, what is actually being spent in the north is not good enough, and that's why I'm making the case that we need that new line from Manchester to Leeds with that really important through stop in Bradford. We need fast trains from Sheffield to Leeds. We still haven't had a year after the IRP, a year and 2 months now. We were promised a plan from government how we're going to get fast trains from Sheffield to Leeds. We haven't even had the terms of reference. We need a T-shaped station in Leeds. There is so much we need that will get people out of their cars and onto the trains, but we need government to back us. So it's really important. Now, I don't have responsibilities for health in the same way that Andy does, but I know that better mental well-being, lower stress, opportunities for better health will come from access to jobs, ability to have training so you can get a better paid job. We know that this is a public health approach, isn't it? It's not just health over here, transport, skills, housing over here. It is completely integrated, and that's where a strategic plan from mayors really does help to have that vision. But I think we could go further in levelling up, talking about the climate emergency, and we're happy to work with government to do that. My Green Jobs Task Force, I pledged 1,000 green jobs for young people. We've already hit that target halfway through the term. I know there's an appetite for it, and we're ready to deliver for government.
Thanks, Stacey. Andy?
Well, I think what you said in your question is absolutely right, Ian. More public control of the system, transport, or you could broaden this to energy or housing. The more public control you have, the more you can dictate the pace of decarbonisation. And you just can't do that in a deregulated transport system. So as we move towards the B network, the first re-regulated services will start in Wigan and Bolton and parts of Salford next September. On that day, 17th of September, which will be the day that re-regulated services return to parts of England outside of London, we will introduce 50 electric buses into service in that area, in those franchises, and they are currently being built in the north of England at Alexander Dennis. That's a great levelling up story, isn't it? That we are building electric buses in the north of England that will enter service in the north of England next year, and there's a pipeline beyond that, Ian. You know, we've got a plan actually for a zero carbon public transport system within a decade, and that will be the UK's first. Our trams already run on renewable energy, and that's a success story, I think, of the city region. If you then add into that, if you like, quadrupling the size of that tram system by supplementing it by hundreds of electric buses, as we will in time, I think, as Tracy said before, you will have a public transport system by the end of the decade that's cheaper to run and brings huge amount of health benefits to our residents, and will be superior. There'll be no need for people to travel in cars to the extent that they do today. So it is about the public control in the system, and I think if you apply the principle more broadly, you would speed up the decarbonisation of the energy grid, and you would speed up the retrofitting of housing if more of it was under public control, or at least if there was stronger regulation of those sectors.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, yeah.
Right, thanks. We all want to see levelling up become a success. To pursue that issue, Mary Robinson. Mary.
Thank you, Chair. The National Audit Office has reported that there's been a great deal of local government policy churn since 1978. And I've got over 50 different initiatives here, which include City Challenge, English Partnerships, Neighbourhood Management, Pathfinders, etc. To what extent are these new initiatives helpful or essential, or is a period of stability more likely to enable sustainable long-term investments, Tracy?
Well, Mary, I completely agree with you, but often those projects are at because there's been a funding opportunity, and we've seen, haven't we, that levelling up, the precursor of levelling up, whether that's the industrial strategy, Northern Powerhouse, the plan for growth, and now levelling up, certainty, continuity is incredibly important. And I think the churn that we've seen over the last few years in the 20 months that I've been mayor, whether that's prime ministers or plans or projects, I think has been destabilising and not helpful. I think when it comes to, we were talking about the Prosperity Fund, the 3-year funding, we need long-term political backing and strategic planning, and that's why I've been making the case to government that mass transit, which is a real game changer for West Yorkshire. Leeds is the only city in Europe without a mass transit system. That has to go beyond many different colours of government, and will be a decade-long project. So the 200 million that's been allocated, saying to government, you've got to commit, and obviously to the Labour Party as well, that this has got to be something that everybody gets behind, because this will be a real tool to level up our communities with that integrated transport system that Andy was talking about, where you have mass transit in the city of Leeds that reaches out to areas that have been disconnected for centuries, and that will be opened up by that exciting transport plan. But we need certainty and stability, and we need a strategic plan that we can all buy into.
So you'd be saying to government, no new initiatives, please. Let's just get on with these.
Well, what I'd be saying is give us that funding settlement, a 5 to 7 year funding settlement, that then we can strategically plan with you to help you deliver on your outcomes, our local outcomes, and we can bring that stability to our region.
In terms of the UK's best interest, do we need to make sure that the levelling up agenda works?
Absolutely. It is absolutely critical for regions that have really suffered over the last couple of decades. It's absolutely critical for West Yorkshire and, of course, the wider north.
Andy?
Could I just say, Mary, I think that question you just asked is absolutely the right question. It's critical if we're going to bring the country through this period and bring it back together, if you like. The whole notion now of regional inequality is out there. It's at the top of the political agenda. In many ways, I've waited all my political life for this moment when we get more serious about regional inequality. Well, it's out there, and the positive is the cry for fairer and more equal treatment for the north of England is not going to go away. It's only going to get louder. But let's work then on a cross-party basis to put in place what is needed truly to bring the north of England closer to the living standards of the south of England and the transport standards. And I think the way that's done is not via initiatives. I mean, nothing wrong with the odd one here or there, but the way it's actually done is if you rewire the way the country works and you put in place long-term funding that goes to the areas that need it most. And that is the German model that I've referenced a couple of times in this session. I think you have to make it a kind of national mission rather than just a sort of, the source of a few press releases around the Levelling Up Fund. I mean, that isn't levelling up. What they did in Eastern Germany after the wall came down and when they went towards reunification, that was levelling up. That was a proper long-term funded programme to deliver equity across the whole of the country. And I think we've hit a moment here where we need to do the same, because if we don't, the fractiousness in our politics, I think will only grow, and the kind of sense of unfairness and neglect will only get deeper. So yeah, I think this is something where there is cross-party agreement. We need more of that sometimes, don't we? Combined authorities are working. Devolution in England is working. It is making a difference, as we've said today, but now is the time really to back it. We've kind of hit this end of the beginning sort of moment. Now's the time, through this trailblazer, but also what's coming beyond. We really need to back it now and let this growth be created across all parts of England.
Thank you, Andy. I believe it's been estimated that halving the productivity gap between the north and the south will add about 83 billion to the UK GDP. Is that what this levelling up agenda is about too?
Absolutely it is. It's about the whole country benefiting, isn't it, from an area that's firing on all cylinders. I think often we describe the UK economy as though it's firing properly on one cylinder. Well, just imagine if all parts of the country were punching their weight. And just to echo Tracy, the Northern Powerhouse concept was first put forward a decade ago by George Osborne, was actually a very valid concept in terms of bringing the cities together, better connecting them, and by doing that, helping them punch their weight. And that railway line across the north of England, from Liverpool through Manchester Airport, Manchester, Bradford, Leeds and beyond, critically important actually. And I still believe in the concept of the Northern Powerhouse. And I think we've got to kind of stop chopping and changing and just get on with, when we say something as a country, let's do it for once, rather than constantly changing our mind and trying to rewrite the script. I think we know what we want. We all want the same thing, hopefully. Well, let's just get on and do it.
Thank you. Just a final question, Tracy. One of the themes of this inquiry so far has been the challenges surrounding deliverability of funding for levelling up. What's the one thing that needs to change or improve in order to ensure the delivering the levelling up agenda? What's the one thing that you would say? And I'm guessing that a block grant and the single pot would be Andy's answer.
Mary, you've guessed right. I think to end those the funding pots, the bidding, to have that block funding that hold us to account, to deliver on outcomes, and will be there. And I think that would be a real game changer at the speed at which we can deliver levelling up as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Thank you both, and thank you to Andy Street, who had to leave us a few minutes ago, for coming and giving us what I think was an excellent review of what's happening with devolution and what more could be achieved if that devolution went further and levelling up was really delivered. So thanks. I think you've thrown out a lot of challenges, both to this committee and to government, and indeed to the Labour opposition as well, about where we go to in the future. So thank you all very much for coming. That's been a really interesting and informative session for us. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Clive.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be back.